I'm Oliver Bruce, dyslexic and dyspraxic serial entrepreneur with little more than one GCSE, but none of that matters. And that is exactly why I started this podcast. I've built multi-million pound businesses from just an idea, and I've gone into markets that I've got no right to be in. No. It's not always plain sailing, and what you see on social media is often a fraction of the reality. I somehow wanted to tell the candid truth, the story around startup and scale-up life, and just how important mental agility and strength is in this largely idealistic and fake world. I hope you enjoy my podcast and can take some solace and some learnings from the unspoken reality and subjectivity of the term success. This is Success is in the Mind, and thank you so much for watching. Over the last 6 months, everybody has seen Jubel.
First impressions are really key. What does it taste like? What does it look like? Do you remember it?
So there was no entrepreneurial flair in the family at all, apart from the fact that you just went, I'll shovel some snow.
The Vikings used to have an expression called burn your boats. So when they would invade somewhere, they would burn their boats, so there was no option of running back to the shore, getting back in the boat and going back home. Yeah, I almost deleted all the files in my brain, to be honest.
So Jesse, thank you so much for joining me. We're here at Jubel's office in London. You were an entrepreneur from a young age. You lived in America, you shoveled snow and you raked leaves. Tell me about how you started in business.
I was probably your slightly stereotypical entrepreneurial kid.
You were? Okay.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. I was always looking for an opportunity to maybe make a quick buck, and I actually lived in the States for a few years growing up. So yeah, I was in Chicago, which was very seasonal.
Right.
So summers would be cutting lawns, doing any sort of lawn care. Winters would be shoveling snow, and in between you'd be raking leaves. So
was that you were charging people the privilege of the shoveling of the snow?
Absolutely, yeah. As soon as there is a dump of snow, I'd be door to door knocking, clearing driveways, took some table salt out, sprinkle it over the path. And yeah, I remember coming home as a 10-year-old with $100 in my pocket, and yeah, just started stashing stuff away and was always looking for an opportunity to make a buck. So
what were your parents doing then? If you went out to the US, was that, what was the reason that you ended up going out there?
Yeah, so my dad actually started as a stockbroker, and he worked in the city.
The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, well, rumor has it, but
penny stocks.
Yeah, maybe not quite successful or maybe dubious, but yeah, he started there and then did quite a 180 in his career. So he actually became a vicar.
Wow.
So yeah, polar opposite ends of the career spectrum. And so we actually moved out to the States because he took a job at a church out there.
Right.
So we were out there for 5 years, and that's when I started my entrepreneurial pursuits, probably.
Did you enjoy being in America?
I loved it. Yeah, it was great.
Because the entrepreneurs in America are totally different to those in the UK, aren't they? It's far easier to raise money. It's more accepted when you cock it up. Was that the kind of forming of you then? Yes, you were shoveling snow and raking leaves, I suppose.
Yeah.
But was that because you were around other people in America that, just kind of grafted?
Well, I'm sure you're a product of your own environment, and there is there's such thing as the American dream, and people do talk about, having the house in the suburbs with the white picket fence and sort of working your way to get there. And yeah, there is a culture of graft and, passion and, real sort of entrepreneurship that I think is a bit ingrained in American culture. So I'm sure it rubbed off on me to an extent, but who knows to what extent.
Your dad being a vicar, what did your mum do?
So mum was a teacher growing up. Okay. She was a French teacher.
So there was no entrepreneurial flair in the family at all, apart from the fact that you just went, I'll shovel some snow?
Not particularly, no, although my dad's parents were publicans. So Dad grew up above a pub, and my great uncle was a head brewer. So
right. So this runs in the family then.
It seemed to run in the blood. And when my dad worked in the city, he actually raised money for breweries. So he helped a couple of companies like Fillers and Matthew Clark with share issuances. So
right.
Yeah, there was quite a thread of drinks and beer through the family, but no entrepreneurialism.
So you were the sort of first one to break the mold, and when you came over to the UK, you still in the entrepreneurial world, still trying to do stuff, make some money, graft, or did you go to university and get your head down?
Still did some stuff growing up. So I think the most successful thing I did was probably going around all the estate agents in my town, of which there are about 8, and I was delivering leaflets for all 8 of them at the same time. So I'm not sure how that actually worked for them.
What
but
was the reason for that? So you were delivering leaflets, charging them for the delivery of the leaflets.
yeah, they would
And
give
that
me
was
a stack of 1,000 and say, we'll give you 100 quid for these. But I figured I'm spending all the time going to a house anyway.
yeah.
I might as well deliver 8 at once rather than just one.
How
So
old? That's a bit dodgy.
it
Shove them
probably,
all in the bin.
it probably was, yeah. They're all competitors as well. But
Oh, were they?
well, they're all estate agents, so they're all trying to get the same business. And I was putting all their leaflets through the same door. But
Conflict of interest there.
yeah, but that worked quite well. And I'm sure, everyone who started a business did a paper round at some point as well.
Oh,
So,
I remember when I was at university, I did leafleting. I handed it out
Yeah.
at nightclubs. My strategy was it was like £20 for the whole evening.
Yeah.
Shove them in the bin, go to the pub. Jobs are good.
oh, really?
So-
Well, you didn't actually do it?
No, of
Oh,
course we
mate.
didn't actually do
No,
it.
I actually did it.
That's more honourable than what I did. No.
I got that Osgood-Schlatter's disease in my knees because of all the knee pain from walking so many miles delivering leaflets. So
Didn't even hire a bike.
no, I ended up walking door to door. But no, I mean, you don't actually learn many business skills from that. But I think that the graft and the discipline of doing a job hard
Yeah.
and doing it through to the end was probably quite good. And
100%.
yeah, paper out's 5:30 in the morning, so you
Yeah.
kind of learn that discipline from an early age.
100%. And how old were you at that point then?
So that would have been between the ages of about 14 and 18 until I went off to uni.
Right, okay. Because then you went to University of Exeter and kind of did a bit of what your dad kind of did, I suppose, economics and finance, which, sort of ran in the family. What was the reason for going into such an academic line
Yeah.
of education?
I'd love to meet an 18-year-old who knows what they want to do when they
100%.
grow up, when they pick their course at uni. I remember just picking the course thinking, I quite like economics as an A-level. It feels like that will probably open some doors in the future.
Yeah.
So why don't I do that at university? But in truth, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So picked economics and finance. To be told, it wasn't a great degree. I found it quite boring.
Really?
Yeah, it was good if you wanted to go work for the Bank of England, but
Yeah.
not hugely helpful if you wanted to do anything else. So
But you did a load of internships and a load of kind of courses during your summer with PwC for one, right? I mean,
yeah.
why weren't you out, earning money, raking leaves for people?
I don't know, maybe some of that slightly traditional conservative upbringing of
Yeah.
you want to get a degree, it's a really good thing to have. I was probably in that mindset of
Right.
I should see this through. And actually, it's probably a value I do hold. If you're going to do something, see it through
Yeah.
and try your best. So I didn't actually enjoy the academic side to uni, but I thought I've signed up to this. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability and see it through. But yeah, tried to use every opportunity in between to see if I could get involved with either internships or extracurricular stuff. And there's probably quite a formative beer experience at uni actually, because in my first year I was in halls and I remember being on my laptop one day, got this email through from the careers department and it said, do you want to pitch the world's biggest brewer their next big beer brand? And I just read the email and it was sponsored by AB InBev.
Right.
And they were looking for students to pitch them a brand new concept of a beer. So I phoned up my mate, who is now head of sales at Jubel, and said, I've just opened this email. You've got to be a team of 2 to 4. Do you want to do it together? We ended up entering the competition as 2 freshers. We ended up winning the UK. We ended up flying over to Europe to their headquarters and we won Europe. So that was in our first year of uni.
And that's kind of how the idea sort of started, or the interest in this world sort of started?
Probably completely different idea to Jubel
Sure.
that I pitched to them. Saved my best till last, but
Surely this isn't the last. You've got plenty more ideas in you.
Yeah.
Because you kind of came up with it when you were kind of traveling the world in terms of the brand that we see now.
yeah, in a sense, yeah. It was final year of uni. We
Yeah.
were out skiing in France, and the uni ski trip was always the week of the year that you would just circle with the red marker metaphorically at the start of the year. It was the best week. So yeah, it's highly oversubscribed. So you often sat there at a table with 5 or 6 people getting their laptops out, just trying to get tickets. And yeah, it was final year where the idea came from. We all managed to get on the trip, and that's where it came across, Beer Pesh.
Because we'll kind of go back into the idea in a minute, but you kind of left university and went to work for Mars. You did a what they call a talent acquisition sort of merger with them. What was the reason for going into Mars, but you having this idea and not following it through?
Yeah, I got the job at Mars actually in my second year of uni for after graduation. So
Right.
I'd already signed a contract to go do the grad
really?
scheme there. So I hadn't had the idea for Jubel yet. So I was pretty signed up to doing 3 years on this rotational grad program,
Right.
getting exposure to different parts of the business and hopefully just rounding my development a bit more. I was very sort of, rough diamond when leaving uni, needed to shave off a lot of sharp edges and they were a great training ground. But yeah, I always had that entrepreneurial flair. So as soon as I got into the corporate world, I realised quite quickly I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole, and was looking for an out when I thought actually that idea from uni could be a goer, and it was.
Well, 100% as we can see now. But whilst at uni, whilst at school, whilst a kid, did you kind of struggle with anything, or were you very academic and able to follow things through as you pointed out?
Academically, I was fortunate enough to be able to just sort of follow. I never hugely enjoyed academics, but I think I saw it as a bit of a discipline task of just it's teaching you how to work hard at something. I genuinely can't remember much of my degree. I think I've got quite a good short-term memory.
Okay.
I worked really hard to remember as much as I could. I almost deleted all the files in my brain, to be honest. So
well, you don't need them.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much thinking I did. I did quite a lot of memorizing, but managed to sort of get through academics okay. But never hugely enjoyed it. I wouldn't have ever described myself as an academic.
No, you and me both. And when you went to work for Marsden and you realised that you wanted to jump ship and you kind of went, actually, the corporate structure is just not for me.
Yeah.
How did you get out of that world? Obviously, you had this idea for Jubel, but what allowed you to go, right, let's just leave Mars behind, go and have a punt over here and see if it works? Because that's a massive risk.
Yeah. Didn't do it quickly, actually. So over the course of a couple of years, I was developing the concept of Jubel alongside my job at Mars. So I was giving up evenings and weekends to try and see whether there was legs in this idea. And yeah, it was following having the idea at final year of university, going off to Mars. I spent the next 2 years developing it and got to the point of feeling quite confident about launching it. And that's when we did. Because
in terms of launching it and taking it to the market, what did you have to kind of have in place to allow you to go, actually, this brand, this product is the one, this is going to work, this is right? Because it wasn't right to start with.
Yeah, so what I wanted to know was, do consumers really want to drink this, or is this just something that I enjoy?
Right.
So from that idea, initially in the Alps, drinking beer pesh, I noticed two things. We were a mixed group from uni.
Yeah.
One was everyone loves it.
Yeah.
Normally it was quite hard to find a product that a mixed group of guys and girls all wanted to enjoy. You normally come back from the bar with 4 or 5 different drinks for people.
Corona have done it.
Corona have done pretty well. Yeah, it's probably, I'd say, next to us, probably the next most inclusive beer. Because they've developed a product that does appeal. I think our product appeals more, but they've developed a sort of brand image that is also very inclusive. But I noticed that was on a liquid level, it was way more inclusive. Everyone actually loved the product and wanted to drink it over and over again. And the second thing was just how delicious it was. And I never had anything like it. So I think, back to your question, that gave me the confidence that there is genuine consumer love for this sort of product. And over the course of those 2 years, I was developing a product, learning how to brew, trial testing it at dinner parties initially, then just inviting mates around and giving them a try. Then going to like small events, food and drink festivals, beer festivals. But just seeing the consumer love for the product, I thought, if I commit my full time to this, I think it can work because people seem to love it.
Before we get back to the podcast, I wanted to ask you, are you a high-growth startup or an ambitious entrepreneur? Our headline sponsors, Capsule Cover, are the perfect insurance specialists if you are geared for high growth. Here at Pinpoint Media, we use Capsule Cover for all our insurance. So if you're an ambitious, high-growth startup, why not reach out to them via capsulecover.com. Coming up in this episode.
Something someone told me, which is build the brand as if you're going to own it forever.
That's what entrepreneurs do, right? No one takes any cash until the exit.
He taught his players to never worry about the score, but focus on doing the right things, and just said the score will follow. And we've really tried to deploy that inside Jubel.
That is all to come in this episode of Successes in the Mind. Because we were talking off air about how events are kind of the ways that you bring this to market, because who can't enjoy a beer at an event? Now, obviously, we get into the fact that you have scaled over the last couple of years, and in the last sort of 6 months, you guys have really taken off. But in terms of raising the money to bring it to market, that in and of itself is quite a hard thing to do, especially when trying to design a product, from scratch. How did you go about raising the cash? Did your dad kind of help you with that?
No, unfortunately not. No, Vicar's salaries are not very
Vicar's
good.
Salaries, but the knowledge, he must have still had the knowledge from when he was raising capital for all these businesses.
Yeah, Dad's always a great source of advice, so I will speak to him about a lot of stuff. But it was actually probably my internship at PwC that was most helpful, because I did M&A there. So I spent a summer literally churning out pitch books.
Right.
And the whole concept of that was make someone want to invest or ultimately buy this brand. So it was a very similar skill set. I was thinking, I just want to make someone invest in Jubel.
Yeah.
So that was actually a great experience to team me up to try and raise investment for Jubel.
Yeah. And in terms of what you'd say to the guys listening, in terms of making people invest in a brand or a product, what do you have to have in place apart from a good idea to do that? Because it is difficult.
Very difficult. I think particularly if you're trying to raise capital ahead of a proper launch, so it's sort of pre-revenue. I think that's quite normal in the tech space, but in the product space, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because until you get it out into market, you don't know whether it's going to work or
100%.
not. So I think it's a combination of factors. I do think it has to be a unique product proposition. I think there's a lot of Me Too's at the moment and people jumping onto hot spaces, but actually hot spaces become cold fairly quickly if there's just thousands of people trying to compete in it. So I think having something that's genuinely different, it's a bit riskier, but I'd probably back something that's trying to be different rather than just trying to be a Me Too.
Yeah.
I think probably having a good team, people who you sort of trust and back to take it forward. And then I think just the basics of a good business strategy, thinking across the board of, your sales, marketing and operations as the kind of core three functions to get off the ground. Do you actually know where you're going to make your product, what your brand stands for, and how you're going to take it to market, and what's your route to market? I think if you've got some general concepts around that, that probably shows that you're thinking about it in the right way, rather than just, I've got a good idea, no idea what to do, but let's see what happens.
And how much did you go and raise then in that case?
So we raised a low six-figure sum actually pre-launch.
Right.
Which at the time was the largest amount of money I'd ever seen when it landed in the business bank account.
What was it? A couple £100,000?
It was low six figures.
Right.
So that's what we raised initially, because I thought that would get us through basically launching it properly, working with a big branding agency, like knew what kind of brand we wanted.
You went and worked with a branding agency?
We did.
Was that a good decision?
I think so. Yeah, you probably get mixed opinions on that, depending on who you speak to. But I think first impressions really do count.
Yeah,
there's a bit of a mindset, particularly in the tech world, probably shaped by that book, The Lean Startup, that is test and learn and fail fast and iterate constantly, which is true to an extent. But I think in product, first impressions are really key.
Yeah.
What does it taste like? What does it look like? Do you remember it? So we sunk a fair bit of that initial investment into doing it right, and we worked with one of the most awarded international design agencies to do that, which was a risk at the time, but actually we won a few design effectiveness awards.
Have you?
Which measures the commercial impact of your design,
Yeah.
as opposed to just does it look pretty.
And how many iterations since the launch in 2018 has there been of the brand?
So of this, 0.
Really?
Pre-launch, I got a mate to design a label that I could just print at home and stick on the bottles to take to some festivals.
Right.
That completely changed.
Yeah.
So that was called Jubel, but it looked completely different.
Right.
That was a very, very different sort of positioning, but gave me the sort of learning to be able to then put a really good brief together for our design agency and then get this out there.
100%. And in terms of that low six-figure sum that you raised, you obviously burnt through a lump of that with the branding agency. Was it actually enough, or did you simply raise too little?
I think we were really, really efficient with our capital, actually. I think in most businesses you would say you raise too little. I think we stretched it a heck of a long way.
Really? What was the burn rate on that? How long did you have it for before you were out?
Well, considering a large chunk went on branding, which was an upfront cost to get us into market.
Yeah.
We probably used about half to three quarters of it on the branding, and the rest of it got us through a year.
Blimey.
So burn rate was very, very low initially, but ruthlessly efficient on cash burn and spend, basically.
And after the branding company, after you spent nearly half of your cash on that, what did the rest of the money get put into? Was it social? Was it product? Was it staff, salaries, offices? What was that? Because so many people hedge on the wrong thing and put it into completely the wrong area.
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of the vanity things in a startup and then the sanity thing. So as a general principle, try to do much more of the latter than the former.
Yeah.
I think something like a really nice office, that was a vanity thing for us.
100%.
I basically worked in Pret-a-Manger for the first year.
Did you?
Yeah.
Was that before the membership card?
Yeah, it was, which is a free office. So
Yeah,
I could probably tell you the 10 best Prets with good Wi-Fi's and toilets in London. But it was certainly focusing on the things that didn't need to be spent. And we basically put resource into launching into the on-trade, hiring good people, getting them knocking on doors, getting us into the right sort of bars and pubs, and starting to build brand momentum. So we spent on as little as we could, but on the right things.
And actually developing and manufacturing a product from scratch comes with a huge amount of issues, a huge amount of cock-ups. Now, you must have brewed beer that was just incorrect, that was rubbish, that tasted bad, and actually sold beer that wasn't very good in the first place. How did you kind of backtrack and maintain some kind of sanity when going through a disaster like that?
So I think I always had a vision of what I wanted the product to taste like, and it was delivering the refreshment of a fruit cider with the sessionability of a nice crisp lager. I found fruit ciders far too sweet, and I found lagers quite boring and quite bland after a while, and actually quite hard to get through. So knowing that the middle ground of that was always where we wanted to be was the sort of North Star or the compass for the product. So every single product development session or iteration or taste test, the North Star was that we're X amount away from where I think we need to get to. So I knew what I wanted it to taste like, and we just didn't really stop until we got there.
And in terms of how you ideated that, and in terms of how you actually came up with the flavour, was it focus groups? Was it just your opinion? Was it your team's opinion? Because to get the right flavour for the right people is so very difficult. Like, what advice would you give to someone that's going into the liquid market, I suppose?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was probably quite helpful for me because I was the consumer.
Right.
So if you're launching something that is targeting a consumer that is not you, I think you need to develop a product for the consumer. Fortunately, that was me, because I was mid-20s. I was living in Southwest London. It was exactly the sort of person that we were trying to target. So I was personally just developing a product that I thought I wanted to drink. And doing very, very simple taste tests, tabletop stuff. The benefit of something like a dinner party is you just notice how many do people have. You invite your friends around. Do they stop drinking it after a while and want to get something else out the cupboard, or do they keep going on it? That's a sort of very cheap sessionability test. So got that to a point, and then the festivals and getting it out into the market teaches you whether the wider market actually want to drink it, and really reaffirm, is your target consumer connecting with your product or not? And every bit of feedback that you're getting, you're then developing into some form of iteration. And we have done a ton of work on the product. Every single detail, from colour to head retention to pH balance to ABV to malt selection, hop varieties, fruit sourcing, delved into every single bit of detail to develop what we see as the perfect product for that position that we wanted to go for.
But where did you learn that, Jesse? Where did you learn to do all of that testing? Because obviously you'd done economics at university. You had no idea how to build or brand or how to launch a beer. Who taught you that?
I think you just learn on the job. I think you asked the right questions. So probably a good benefit of being at Mars for a couple of years. They just said, better to ask the stupid question than stay stupid for not asking it. And they would tell you that a lot. So got into this mindset of, if I've got a question, I just need to ask it. And worked with some great brewers. I couldn't wait to drop chemistry. So it was all sort of taking me back to GCSEs and trying to remember my chemistry stuff. But
and with your short-term memory, did you forget everything?
I did forget everything, absolutely everything. So it was learning it from the basics, but just asking questions. Okay, so the color of the beer, for instance, this is too dark. I want a really light, crisp lager. We want to cue refreshment with every single sensory touch point. How do we change that? Oh, that's all down to your malt selection. So here's the percentage of malts at the moment. We need to increase the lager malt, reduce the caramel. Okay, great. Well, let's try that on the next brew. And then you just keep asking questions. This is like, it's a little bit tangy around the sides of my mouth. That's not technical speak. But then they go, oh, right, well, the pH is a little bit low, actually. Like, if we change the time and the temperature and the brew process, then we might be able to tweak the pH and bring that up a little bit. So you just end up asking the sort of key questions. They translate in my plain English into some brewing technical terms. And over the course of a couple of years, we got there.
And you then had a prototype. You produced 5,000 bottles. You went to a music festival. And that was the kind of first time you brought the brand to market, essentially.
Yes, it was. That was the key thing that basically made me quit my job at Mars.
Right.
Because we sold all those bottles over the weekend. The product was mega popular.
Right.
It was quite similar to the Innocent Smoothies, apart from the bin. I think they did a festival in London, sold them out, and then just quit their jobs basically the next week. I quit my job the next week at Mars, handed in my notice. Didn't know how we were going to launch the business properly, but thought there's legs in this. People love the product. I need to commit my full time to it.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of then jumping ship, did you still have some sort of reservation and kind of go, actually, it might not work? Or were you balls deep, fully in there, absolutely believing in the brand and product?
Well, I think I felt I had to jump in full time.
Right.
I heard someone say the Vikings used to have an expression called burn your boats.
Right.
So when they would invade somewhere, they would burn their boats, so there was no option of running back to the shore, getting back in the boat and going back home.
I've never heard that. That's cool.
Yeah, I think I heard it in a book or on a podcast or something.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the mindset I was in, was thinking, if I'm still at Mars and still trying to develop this, I can see myself here in 5 years' time with some golden handcuffs on and still just kind of petering around with this idea that never goes anywhere.
The whole what if. Yeah.
Yeah, I quit my job. I moved back home. And then over the summer when we started to launch, I moved into the warehouse of our factory, slept on the floor. I mean, it was pretty grungy, but I think it probably forced me to make the business idea work.
Yeah.
Because if it didn't, then I didn't have much to show for myself.
But did you at that point have the money to put into it? Or did you then raise the money after you left Mars?
After I left Mars.
After you left Mars, you raised the cash. So you literally went, okay, don't want a salary, gonna hedge it all. I'm not going to worry about, I'm assuming, taking any money. Whatever you had in your savings account was what you were living off and what you were investing in.
Yeah, so I spent 8 months of unpaid work on Jubel, just laying the groundwork, trying to raise capital, continuing to test and learn, putting very small amount of my savings, which I didn't have much of, into brewing a batch, selling the batch, continually developing the business plan.
Yeah.
Then raised the money and then started paying myself a pretty terrible salary, which didn't really go very far.
And are you still on a terrible salary, or have you you're on it now?
Comparatively speaking, yes. I'll be probably earning 10 times more at Mars, but I'm having a lot of fun doing this. So.
That's what entrepreneurs do, right? No one takes any cash until the exit. And I'm assuming there's some sort of exit on the horizon, or is it very much just brand awareness, market share, and scale for the next couple of years?
I think there's two types of mindset that I try and make sure I stay in. One is something someone told me, which is build the brand as if you're going to own it forever, which I think shapes the sort of decisions you make. You think about long-term decisions, you don't think about short-term ones. That hugely shapes the type of brand that we're building, because we are looking to build a sustainable business and a sustainable brand. We're not looking to just sprint for 5 to 6 years and that be it, because I think you end up cutting corners and you end up doing things that mean you're not actually building something that could be around for 100 years.
Yeah.
So that's one mindset. And I think the other, to sort of counterbalance that a bit, is knowing that we've raised external finance, have to be cognizant of the fact that there needs to be a return at some stage, whether that is dividends, a listing, an exit, whatever it might be. We need to kind of think about how we're delivering value back to shareholders. So balancing those two things, I think, drives the right sort of decision making day to day.
100%. Because since that day that you raised your initial seed fund, I suppose you've raised more money since then. You've done the 2.7 million quid fund this year, I think, 2022. That must have then been the biggest amount of money you've ever seen. That must have then propelled you into the stratosphere. And we were saying again off air that over the last 6 months, everybody has seen Jubel. Everybody's buying it. You no longer need to push it in bars. What have you kind of done differently and learned over the last sort of 2 or 3 years that you've now put in place that's allowed you to have that a huge growth?
Yeah, I think we've basically focused on a strategy, and one of my favorite books is this one called The Score Takes Care of Itself by one of the most successful American football coaches of all time. Okay. And he taught his players to never worry about the score, but focus on doing the right things, and just said the score will follow. And we've really tried to deploy that inside Jubel, and just said, we know the right things we need to focus on. Don't worry too much about the score, which for us is your turnover, basically in a startup business. We knew that the revenue would follow if we do the right things. Yeah. So we know for us, if we get into the right sort of on-trade accounts, and then we build the brand equity through being at the right sort of festivals and events and delivering brand experience, and we're in the right sort of off-trade outlets in that area, the more those Venn diagrams overlap, the more brand momentum we build. And we've stuck at that and focused on it for the last few years. And again, just ignored the vanity metrics. We don't export to any countries because it's a massive waste of time. People who say, oh, we're exporting to 30 countries, it sounds amazing, but it probably makes up about 2% of their revenue.
And was that a cognitive decision for you to go, we're not exporting, or was that just simply because you haven't had the time to? At what point in the journey did you realize that exporting for you guys wasn't worth it?
Well, I think everyone talks about cash as being a limited resource in startups, but my personal view is time is a more limited resource than cash, and how you spend your time is vitally important. And your time can be spread across so many different things. I would much rather build a brand that is dominating in like the initial markets that we're in, so London, Bristol, Cornwall, Scotland, then dominates in the UK before we start to think about international. Because otherwise, I just think we're spreading our time too thinly. And I'd rather do one thing and do it well rather than try and do loads of things and do them all quite averagely. I've visited over 400 Sainsbury's stores myself.
How many are there in the country?
About 1,400, so I've got a few to go.
Got 1,000 to go.
Yeah. One of our 5 core values as a business is being curious, because I don't think there's the silver bullet out there that's like there is one size fits all answer to how do I grow a successful business.
So speaking of time, during the pandemic, you had a lot more time than you ever had before because so much stuff stopped for you guys. You quite quickly pivoted and went online though. What was the reason for that?
So I don't think I had much more time in the pandemic. Actually, no, I don't think I've stopped being busy for 4 and a bit years. But you are completely right. A lot of stuff stopped, which was the on-trade turned off like a tap.
Yeah.
We had our last on-trade order mid-March 2020. And me and my head of sales were basically the management team at the time. And we sat down and just put a bit of a plan on a page. And we were trying to look at broadly speaking, what are we going to do to drive the top line? What are we going to do to cut the bottom line? And just trim costs and drive revenue. And online was the biggest opportunity we identified. We just thought retail is going to be there. We were in Sainsbury's, we were launching in Waitrose in the summer. But actually, if we can get online, we're probably going to see people starting to buy way more because that's the only thing they can do. And it turned out to be a good use of our time because we saw our digital sales actually reach a point that was ahead of where we were selling in the on-trade pre-pandemic, which to us was pretty mad. When people couldn't find a pint in their pub, there were an insane amount of people going to our very shoddy website and buying beers, which was very encouraging for us.
Because it took you 2 weeks to go fully e-commerce on your website. Why didn't you do that way before the pandemic? Because for me, rightly or wrongly, I would have just assumed that being online as well as on the on-trade, as well as it was a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think pre-pandemic, it was probably back to that question of how do we spend our time? And we're very much focused on building it into the right sort of accounts in the on-trade and then supporting it through distribution in the off-trade. Digital was just a space that we didn't have time to focus on. I think the shift that the pandemic probably created was showing businesses that actually a more omni-channel approach is probably the way forward. And digital has remained a very strong channel for us, still being about 15% of our monthly revenue.
1.5.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Even a couple of years on where the on-trade is back to 3/4 of the business and absolutely flying again, we're still seeing very strong digital growth, which is great.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms, I suppose, of getting into the supermarkets, did that maintain and sustain during the pandemic, or did that also shut down because essentially people weren't going to the shops like they used to?
So we were already in Sainsbury's, which was great. We would view getting a product into an existing customer almost as a new customer, because we only had one product in pre-pandemic. We finished the pandemic with 3 products in Sainsbury's, so we did grow with them.
When you mean one product, it was different, one flavour.
So we started with just the peach cans in Sainsbury's. We now have the peach and the grapefruit cans and the peach 4-packs. So, and we're in about 1,200 stores now, and pre-pandemic we were in about 600. So we've doubled distribution, we've tripled our ranging, which is amazing. So even though it's not the headline of we've just got a listing in, you know, Tesco, Asda, Morrison's, whatever, we've been very happy with our retail growth because we've grown within Sainsbury's a huge amount. And actually over last winter, we were the #1 rate of sale craft single. Someone said to me once, Jubel will never sell in the winter. That will only sell in the summer like cider.
Really?
So I opened the category report and I was very excited to see that we were the #1 rate of sale through the 13 weeks of winter.
But it was inspired by skiing, so why wouldn't it sell in the winter?
Great question. I think the fact it was fruit-led probably led people to believe it might act similar to cider in the UK, which is quite summer skewed. But it's a really good point. We have ski credentials and ski roots, and we dial that up in the winter. We talk about how the brand came to be. It's a big tradition in the Alps, and so we started to try and bring that through in terms of brand image and how we market the brand, and it does connect with people. And Fundamentally, we think the product's delicious. So, rain or shine, I think people are still caning the stuff, which is good.
Rightly so. And actually, when you started up, it wasn't in cans, was it? It was in bottles for a couple of months. But
Yeah.
what was the reason for sacking the bottles off and going for cans?
So one was a commercial decision and one was a sustainable one. The commercial decision was we've done most of our learning by getting very close to the action.
Right.
I've visited over 400 Sainsbury's stores myself.
How many are there in the country?
About 1,400. So I've got a few to go.
Got 1,000 to go.
Yeah. But I've spoken to a lot of GMs of Sainsbury's outlets and looked at handheld data for beer sales and looked at where it sells in the store. Cans were generally selling about twice as much in their small stores as bottles were.
Yeah.
And more than half our distribution was in the small stores than the big ones. So that was an easy commercial decision. I think it will double the rate of sale. And it did.
Yeah.
The sustainable decision was when we weighed up cans versus bottles, excuse the pun, bottles were a lot heavier.
Yeah.
And in terms of road mileage, in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of pallet optimization, in terms of space usage, in terms of recyclability, council regulations, overall, we thought cans were a much more sustainable choice, more recyclable, easier to recycle, and infinitely recyclable versus bottles. And so we made the change across the board rather than just bringing out cans as a new SKU. We basically made a hard switch, and bottles were out, cans were in, and we think it was a really good decision.
100%. And in terms of when you make your decisions, you seem to almost go with your gut to a certain extent. Yes, it's based to a certain extent on data, but largely it's what you think is the right thing to do. How do you go about making a decision, specifically when you're up against it? Because you haven't got a huge amount of time, as you already alluded to.
No, I think when it's your own thing, I think you do really have to trust your gut and listen to your gut. And probably early in the journey, I probably listened a little too much to certain bits of advice. I think it's really critical that you have a humble, teachable attitude and take on loads of input.
Yeah.
But I think what you need to do is develop your own filter very, very well for what is actually going to be helpful for my business versus that doesn't quite fit with my vision. That might have worked on your business, but that was a very different scenario, different time, different product. And actually develop that filter to the point where you're able to weed out what is the best bits of advice to deploy in my business. Early on, I probably listened to too much and was a bit pulled around in terms of how should you launch the brand? You should be on trade only. You should never work with a retailer. If I'd listened to that advice, we would fail because we launched with Sainsbury's in the first year. And I mean, that was half our business through the pandemic. Without it, we probably wouldn't be here. So yeah, it's been learning to sort of listen to the gut, develop the right filter for our vision for the brand, but still remain very open to sort of loads of input from other people.
And you were saying that you were given all this advice, but you didn't listen to it. Who was giving you that advice, and why were you talking to them in the first place if, for instance, you didn't necessarily trust them?
Well, I think it was probably more choosing the bits of advice to listen to rather than thinking everything this person's saying to me, I must go do.
Right.
I was being quite forthcoming, reaching out to other people who had started businesses, trying to learn about their highs, their lows, their mistakes, their successes, even some very specific situations. What did you do with this, to learn from people? But I think when you give someone a slightly more open question, like what do you think was the most important decision you made in the success of your business? It's a very open question. What worked for them might not be what works for you. Someone told me once, like, PR was the biggest game changer for their business. We've spent a decent amount of money on PR. I don't think it was a great growth driver for us. On reflection, I would have much rather pumped that into events and festivals. So 100%. I think that's an example of what worked for someone else might not work for you, but listen to the advice, but just take from it what you think is actually really going to work for your business. Because I don't think there's the silver bullet out there that's like there is one size fits all answer to how do I grow a successful business.
I mean, you've got a team now that clearly, a lot of them you've already said are ex Red Bull, so they've got a huge amount of experience in the drinks world. You've said, people have also said that your brand is the Red Bull of beer, right? Now, in terms of the advice that they give you, do you now listen to your team? Do you still source outside opinions? How do you now take advice and action it?
Absolutely, yeah. One of our 5 core values as a business is being curious. And what that means is being curious about the market, our competitors, like our product, our customers, our suppliers, asking loads of questions, having a humble, teachable attitude to actually take on board feedback and learning from anyone. So I ask the team loads of questions. I always want their input. I will speak to I mean, we don't have a very hierarchical business, but the most junior employee in the team, I will want to get a debrief from them on how did your activation go? What did you learn? What could we have done differently? What are you hearing from customers that you thought was really interesting? And you'll always weed out that sort of one golden nugget that will influence the strategy of the entire business. I think as soon as you stop listening to your team, it's probably game over. So yeah, I'm always ears open to what's going on. Doesn't mean I will always do what they might say or share, but it does mean I think we end up being so much better as a business by always having that kind of curious attitude.
100%. And in terms of having that curious attitude, obviously, when you raised your initial seed fund, it wasn't quite enough. It was a bit tight, so to speak. You've raised nearly 3 million quid recently. What was the reason for raising that much money? How did you raise that money? And why did you raise it now?
I think we reached the point of being able to start scaling the brand.
Right.
Pre that round, I would say we were well and truly a startup. I think we've probably moved a little bit to be more of a scale up.
100%.
If I looked at the foundational elements of building a successful business in product, we had the highest rate of sale and repeat rate in a major national retailer. That shows the consumer wants it. So we are actually scaling something that's got quality. And someone likened it to like a small picture. And, if you have something with quality, when you grow it or sort of scale it, it doesn't pixelate. And I think I felt like that small thing we had was quality and there were the right foundations there to start scaling it. Product had great traction. We had tested and learned enough in terms of team to know what kind of salespeople do we need, what kind of activation people do we need, what geographies work well for us as a business. And we had a very clear strategy. It just required a decent chunk of funding to start deploying it. So we raised the money, now we're into deploying the strategy and it's well and truly working.
And how did you know how much money to raise? Because 2.7 million quid is a precise number. It could have been 3 million or 2.5, Why 2.7 and how did you kind of come up with that?
So I actually raised a little more than what I wanted to. I thought we just needed 2 million quid.
Right.
I say it was a lot of money for us. And I put a business plan together, looked at how we're going to grow the org structure, how we're going to scale spend in certain functions like marketing, how we're going to grow the brand, what geographies we're going to launch into. It was a very well thought through strategy that we put a number next to. And I think the old adage sort of goes of like, raise money when you don't need it. And I thought, actually, this round is oversubscribed. People are really keen to get involved in the action. There's a few investors here who have a huge amount of value and experience they could add. I'd probably rather just give ourselves a little bit of buffer rather than turning them away, hence raising 2.7.
Fine. And in terms of future raises, I'm assuming there's some more on the horizon that you'll want to go for to maybe take it internationally?
Yeah, well, our cash burn would be pretty bad if we were already going back for more, having raised 6 months ago. But
100%. But in terms of future planning, 3 years, let's say, is there a future to raise more money, or are you hoping that this is it and you'll be able to scale it based on the 2.7?
I'm actually hoping that will be it. That was the business plan I put together, was how do we get us through to profitability here? That is the game plan. It's always caveated with you never know what growth will demand. Working capital requirements go up significantly and quite savagely when growth starts to accelerate massively, which is what we're experiencing at the moment. The amount of our cash that is tied up in stock just to service our demand is way higher than what I thought it would be, because growth is ahead of where I thought it would be.
So, does that scare you?
Not particularly, because you can work on things like working capital cycles. You can work with your suppliers. You can work with your customers. You can use stuff like invoice factoring if you must and if you need to. So the encouraging thing is it's all the problem or the pain point is being driven by growth. I'd be pretty scared if the product wasn't moving and we just raised a big chunk of funding and it wasn't going anywhere. We know where to deploy the capital, and where we are deploying it is working and it's driving growth. So that encourages me more than scares me, I'd say.
And what's it like? Because I've never run a business where you haven't made profit because it's a service sector, for instance, it's people's time. Now, when you're running a business and you're scaling it 3, 4, 5, 6 years, or in your case 4, and you haven't made a profit, that must be a weird feeling, because so many businesses out there are set up to make profit. When will you turn a profit, and what do you do if you don't?
So profit is definitely the sanity metric in business, and revenue is more the vanity one, I'd say.
100%.
We are prioritizing revenue over profit for the time being. We see revenue as the goal, and cash as the fuel. So if revenue is sort of where we're trying to get to, we're trying to measure and manage our cash usage and our fuel usage at a sort of pace where it's going to get us to our goal. So we have very clear revenue goals. And we will lose a considered amount of money, which we're happy to lose along that pathway to get to where we want to get to. We're producing a sort of product that no one else is producing. There's a window of opportunity for us to do a bit of a grab of the market.
Yeah.
And then we want to hold on to that space. So we are putting our foot pretty firmly down on the accelerator. So our fuel usage might be slightly higher than if we're sort of in cruise control, but that's within a considered strategy of where we want to get our business to. So that's why we are losing a bit of money, but we're losing how much we want to lose, which is the key thing. If we're losing an unforeseen amount of money, I'll be really worried.
Yeah.
I think our commercial discipline is quite strong. So we've actually delivered our annual business plans within a few percent of the revenue and the loss figure that we said we'd do at the start of the year, every year, which is quite unusual for a startup business because you sort of never know what's going to happen. But we've managed to actually deliver what we said we would.
And your investors are happy that you're just, going through making a loss, gaining market share. That's cool. That's perfectly fine with them.
Yeah, that is the strategy that we raised money behind. So they were fully bought into that. I mean, we're not burning that much cash. We are losing some money, but if we wanted to turn a profit, we would just put our hiring plans on hold and turn a profit next month. So
it's as close as that. It's really, really close to actually making a profit then.
Yeah, it's because we're over investing into overheads. We know the lag time on hiring someone like a salesperson. So it wouldn't be like straight away you make a profit. But if you put the hiring plans on pause, the hires you've just made will start to basically break even in 3 months. And then we would start to be profitable. But we've gone from 9 to 20 people in the last year. So we are investing into overheads. We are investing into marketing. Those both do come at a cost. But it's always those things that then drive the big jumps in revenue, which is what we are seeing.
Yeah.
So that's why we believe it works as a formula, but we're controlling the losses to a pretty considered amount.
100%. And in terms of marketing, I mean, I came across it because I was being served your adverts consistently over the last 6 months. So it's evidently working in that sense. But something that you mentioned to me earlier was that you still run the social page yourself, or at least some of your guys run it together. But then you speak about how you simply haven't got time. How do you manage your day? How do you manage your week? And what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so in that specific example, I think we're just a little under-resourced at the moment in our marketing team. So that for me is speaking to our head of marketing, we're overwhelmed. We've got too much to do. Where can I help? And that's an easy thing to just go, well, it's quicker for you to do it because you've done it for years, rather than like try and get someone else on it who's going to need a lot of help and leaning in.
Yeah.
So that's just trying to help a function where they might be a bit under-resourced. How I split my time is trying to keep that sort of, I guess, the focus on, I actually have a note on my laptop of what are my top 3 priorities. And I do just flick it open at the start of every week and go, oh yes, those are the 3 things that I need to focus on more than the other stuff this week.
Okay. Is that a weekly thing or an annual thing? Are you the 3 targets or?
I would say they probably, I do things, so probably sequentially rather than in parallel. So once the number 1 thing has been done, what's number 4 on the list can sort of come into the top 3. And that probably goes on a 2 to 3 month cycle.
Okay.
So at one particular point in time, recruitment might be top of my list because I don't want to work with agencies because they're so expensive and they probably won't deliver on the brief. So I'm going to get a LinkedIn Premium subscription, and I'm going to do it myself, and we're going to fill pipelines with talent, and we're going to fill those roles very quickly. So that'll be like a focus period of a couple of months, and then I'll probably move on to something else once we feel like we've kind of ticked that box a bit. So things do go in fits and spurts, but I'll try and always remain focused on those top 3 things and try and remain helpful to kind of our key 3 functions, which are sales, marketing, and then ops and finance as a third, to make sure I'm close enough to the detail and supporting those guys where they need it.
And I mean, in terms of work-life balance, are you working literally 18 hours a day on the weekends as well? Or are you one of those entrepreneurs that has the ability to go, I need a day off, I'm going to take a day off?
Yeah, I think rest's really important. I think we're built for rest. And it's important for your longer-term productivity to make sure you're building it in. You look at athletes, like the most important thing they talk about is rest and recovery and sleep. So if it works for them, it's probably working in the entrepreneurial world. But no, I try and remain very balanced. So I start my day pretty early. I try and finish at a good time because I got married last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, relationship with my wife is very important. So making sure we have evenings together. We both serve at our local church, so 2 nights a week we have commitments there. And then Sundays I'll generally try and take off, slightly out of principle, but also just because I think rest is really important, and just having at least 1 day a week where you're not thinking about work is really important. So no, I think working really hard but making sure you're keeping a balance is pretty critical to keep those energy levels up.
100%. And I mean, in terms of keeping that balance, keeping that momentum up for the business and yourself included, 3-5 years time, what does Jubel look like in that sense? Are you going to have taken over the UK's market share?
We jolly well hope so. Yeah, the vision was always create a new category, which
Sure.
I'm sure quite a lot of startups have that on a deck initially. But we were very focused on that. No one else was doing what we were doing. We'd seen how transformative fruit had been within both cider, gin, vodka. Everything that was growing was a fruit-led variant.
Yeah.
There was nothing in beer. So we were pretty bullish about the idea of fruit can drive a significant amount of growth in beer because it makes the category way more accessible to more consumers. And we're pioneering that. So our vision is you walk into a shop in 3 to 5 years' time, and there is a whole bay dedicated to fruit lager, of which we are the pioneer. We're the biggest brand, but there's probably 4 or 5 others.
Yeah.
In the same way that fruit cider started in traditional cider, but within 15 years has broken out, formed a new category, and now 1 million more people drink fruit cider than apple cider.
Yeah, it's very true. Copperberg, all that, absolutely, they have good market share there. And in terms, I suppose, prior to getting to that point in 3 to 5 years' time, how can we help you get to that point? How can the listeners, how can the viewers buy your product online, in shops, in pubs? Where can they go?
Yeah, it'd be great if people want to give it a try. We're available in Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Whole Foods. We're launching on Ocado this month, I believe. And you can get it on our website, you can get it on Amazon, and we're available in over 1,000 pubs, bars, restaurants as well. So if you live in London, Edinburgh, Bristol, Cornwall, you're more likely to find an outlet nearby because that's where our salespeople are. But it'd be amazing if people want to go and have a try of the product. And if they like it, tell a mate or two. It'd be brilliant.
And they can get it online. And I'm acutely aware of your time. Look at that, 10:15. You've got a meeting. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not listen to a few more and click subscribe? This podcast was produced by Pinpoint Media, and I'm Oliver Bruce. I hope we can speak again soon. Take care.